The air inside Venezuela's presidential palace was heavy with tension as Nicolás Maduro, standing before a room packed with journalists, issued one of his most striking warnings to date. His tone was deliberate, his words chosen to echo far beyond Caracas, reaching Washington, the wider South American region, and the international community. The Venezuelan leader has never shied away from fiery rhetoric, but this time the scale of the accusation carried an unmistakable urgency. He claimed that the United States, under the leadership of former President Donald Trump, had positioned a formidable military threat at Venezuela's doorstep. Maduro raised his voice as cameras zoomed in. The words he delivered were not speculative, not cautious. They were blunt, forceful, and intended to alarm. 8 military ships with 1,200 missiles and a nuclear submarine are targeting Venezuela. This is an extravagant, unjustifiable, immoral, and absolutely criminal bloody threat. Nicolás Maduro, president of Venezuela. The statement landed like a thunderclap. To Maduro, the presence of American military assets in the Caribbean represented nothing less than an existential challenge to his country. In his framing, it was more than strategy, it was provocation, a deliberate escalation designed to corner Venezuela into confrontation. The Venezuelan president accused Washington of pushing what it described as a maximum pressure campaign. But now, according to him, that campaign had shifted from economic sanctions and diplomatic isolation to direct military intimidation. They have wanted to escalate what they call maximum pressure, which in this case is military. And in response to maximum military pressure, we have declared maximum preparedness for the defense of Venezuela. Nicolás Maduro. The phrase maximum preparedness became a headline on its own, underscoring how the Venezuelan government intends to portray itself, unyielding, ready, and fully mobilized to repel what it calls an imperial threat. Maduro painted this preparedness as not merely defensive, but as a patriotic obligation, framing Venezuela's sovereignty as inseparable from the people's dignity. Behind him, Defense Minister Vladimir Padrino Lopez and senior members of his administration stood firmly, nodding as if to affirm that this was not rhetoric for its own sake. The Venezuelan president then turned his words directly toward the former US president. His warning was both personal and political, invoking Donald Trump by name in a manner designed to make headlines across both hemispheres. Mr. President Donald Trump, you must be careful because Marco Rubio wants to stain your hands with blood. South American, Caribbean, Venezuelan blood. Nicolás Maduro. The reference to Marco Rubio, the Republican senator from Florida, was not incidental. Rubio has long been one of the fiercest critics of Maduro's rule and a vocal advocate for strong US action against Venezuela. By accusing Rubio of pushing Trump toward violent escalation, Maduro personalized the geopolitical standoff, suggesting that individuals in Washington were plotting to provoke a wider regional catastrophe. His tone hardened as he expanded on the warning. They want to drag you into a bloodbath to tarnish the Trump name forever with a massacre against the Venezuelan people, with a terrible war across South America and the Caribbean. Nicolás Maduro. The imagery was chilling. A bloodbath, a terrible war. These were not abstract metaphors. Maduro insisted that the strategy of his adversaries was to entangle Trump in a continental-scale conflict that would define his legacy in the darkest of terms. Maduro did not stop at accusations. He framed the potential consequences in historic and geographical scale, warning of devastation that would engulf not just Venezuela, but the entire region. This would be a full-scale continental war. They want to stain Donald Trump's hands with blood on a human level. Nicolás Maduro. By invoking the notion of a continental war, Maduro appealed to broader fears in South America and the Caribbean, that local disputes could spiral into something that would destabilize the hemisphere. For Maduro, the United States was not merely threatening one country. In his telling, it was threatening an entire continent's peace and sovereignty. Shifting briefly to a more personal register, Maduro spoke as though he were in direct conversation with Trump. Using a rhetorical device, he referred to himself in the third person, Nico, to underscore the intimacy of the message. If you ask Nico, that is me, what message I would send to Mr. Donald Trump, President of the United States, I would say, seek peace in us. You will always find a friendly hand for peace, for development, for independence, for dignity, and with respect, showing the Venezuelan Constitution. Nicolás Maduro. It was a striking juxtaposition. On one hand, he had accused Washington of preparing for war. On the other, he extended what he described as a friendly hand for peace. To Maduro, this duality was deliberate, painting himself as both the defender of sovereignty and a leader willing to pursue peace, provided Venezuela's independence and constitution were respected. As the press conference stretched on, Maduro returned to a theme that has defined much of his rhetoric over the years, his defiance of US-led attempts to unseat him. The pursuit of regime change is exhausted and has failed as a policy worldwide. Nicolás Maduro. Here, the Venezuelan leader broadened his argument beyond his country, asserting that efforts at externally imposed regime change from Iraq to Libya to Afghanistan had failed as a sustainable policy. By linking Venezuela's struggle to global patterns, he sought to place himself in the company of nations that had resisted outside pressure. For Maduro, the message was clear. His government was not an outlier, but part of a larger international resistance to foreign intervention. The timing of Maduro's remarks is critical. They come amid heightened tensions in the Caribbean, where US naval maneuvers have been officially described by Washington as anti-drug operations. Yet Caracas interprets them very differently, framing them as preparation for intervention. By emphasizing numbers, 8 warships, 1,200 missiles, and a nuclear submarine, Maduro dramatized the military imbalance, portraying Venezuela as David against a US Goliath. International observers, however, caution that some of Maduro's claims may be exaggerated for domestic consumption. Yet exaggeration or not, the political purpose is clear: to rally Venezuelans around the flag, to galvanize a population under sanctions and economic hardship, and to warn potential allies that the crisis could spill beyond its borders. At home, Maduro's message reinforces his narrative of resistance. Venezuela has been grappling with economic collapse, shortages, and mass emigration. By portraying the United States as an aggressor, Maduro attempts to shift the national conversation from internal failures to external threats. The declaration of maximum preparedness serves both as a military signal and a political instrument, reminding Venezuelans that in times of crisis, unity is paramount. For the international community, particularly in South America and the Caribbean, Maduro's words carry an implicit challenge. His suggestion of a continental war is meant to force neighboring governments to consider the costs of siding too closely with Washington. It also sends a message to allies like Russia, China, and Iran, who have historically supported Maduro, that Venezuela is standing firm but still in need of diplomatic and economic backing. By invoking Trump directly, Maduro aimed his rhetoric not just at Washington's political class, but also at global media outlets that follow every twist of US politics. In doing so, he ensured his words would reverberate well beyond Caracas. As the press conference ended, Maduro's message remained unmistakable. He portrayed Venezuela as a nation under siege, facing overwhelming military pressure from the world's strongest power, yet determined to resist. Whether exaggeration or reality, the narrative serves multiple purposes: warning Washington, rallying Venezuelans, and appealing to sympathetic nations abroad. In his own words, Maduro framed the crisis not as a confrontation of his making, but as an imposed battle for survival. And in one of his most striking statements, he left both Venezuelans and the world with a choice of interpretation. Was this the cry of a besieged leader, or the calculated warning of a strategist seeking to reframe global perceptions? Only time will tell whether these words signal the brink of a wider conflict or remain another chapter in the long standoff between Caracas and Washington.